It's my distinct pleasure to have our second keynote speaker come up and say a few words. Before she does, I would like to introduce her. I'm looking at the program. She's got a full-page bio, which I'm sure all of you can read on page 11. But a little bit about her. Erin Alleman, the newest executive director of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. Erin has, before coming to CMAP again, she served as vice president at Metro Strategies, and prior to that, she served a couple of different roles at IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation. Director of Office of Planning and Programming was the last post before she moved over to the private sector as a transition to coming back to CMAP. The reason I'm saying coming back to CMAP is because that's where she started her career after grad school, and she has assumed the position of the executive director at CMAP since 8 weeks ago, as she told us yesterday. And it's been, I think, a very momentous occasion in Erin's life, coming back to Chicago from Springfield. I'm sure she enjoyed Springfield, but I'm sure she enjoys Chicago a lot more. And when we were putting the program together for this event, we thought of inviting Erin because of her announcement as the executive director at CMAP, mainly because of a couple of things. One is it gives her, as the leader for the planning agency, to position herself as to where she's going to take the agency as far as this particular paradigm shift is concerned with respect to transportation. And so that's a main thing. And then, of course, this will be the first event she's going to be talking at. So both of those combined makes a lot of sense as to why she's going to be making these remarks, and we are looking eagerly forward to her remarks. And without further ado, page 11 of the program, please, but Erin Alleman.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sriraj, for having me here. I'm so excited to be here. And so if you're unfamiliar with CMAP, although I'm in a planning arena here, so I hope that you all are, our focus is really on helping communities across the region and the region itself prosper. We're the comprehensive planning agency for Northeastern Illinois. We represent 7 counties, 284 municipalities, lots and lots of local units of government nestled in there as well. And we support our region by really looking to help our communities conduct good planning at the local level so that communities can achieve their goals and that our region can also prosper from these coordinated efforts all together. We also guide public investments, particularly related to transportation, to make the region more economically competitive. And another focus of ours is really improving quality of life across the region, and that is by developing a regional comprehensive plan. Ours is called On2 2050, and it incorporates a number of the values that we've been talking about here today. So as it relates to connected and automated vehicles, after my stint at IDOT, this is something that I learned a lot about, and especially driving back and forth to Springfield, Illinois. I can tell you that I wished that they would have come quite some time ago. So as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about today, I really started thinking about my family. I have 2 kids. They're 5 and 8 years old. There's a real possibility by the time they get to driving age, they may understand the rules of the road, but they aren't going to need to operate a vehicle in the same way many of us have grown up and learned to operate a vehicle. And even if they still have to operate vehicles, I would imagine that in their lifetime, that too will consistently change and transform, and it may just not be the same ever again. So everyone keeps talking about how this shift to connected and automated vehicles is going to change our lives for the better. But as a planner, I've been thinking about the question of, really, will they? Right? So what I want to talk to you today about is the critical role that government and good planning must play if we're going to see the benefits of transportation technologies implemented here and across the country. So when it comes to connected and automated vehicles, we know the private sector hasn't been afraid to take chances. New transportation options are popping up seemingly every day. We've got car share, bike share, scooter share, not to mention this added layer of there are pretty autonomous vehicles out there on the road right now. So never before has technology been so disruptive to government. But these changes really shouldn't alarm us as planners or government. After all, planning is really rooted in this fundamental belief that things change and we can change things. And the fact is that constantly, on a daily basis, our local governments are dealing with change, whether it's shifting demographics, whether it's economic, climate, politics, the financial realities that they have to deal with on a daily basis. We can really get hung up on trying to find the perfect solution. But I think it's really critically important that maybe we take a few steps, maybe they're imperfect at first, forward, and really think about how it is we're going to address these proactively. So a good example of this that I like to talk about is that we as planners have been talking about the last mile solution, and we've been talking about these last mile solutions for at least a decade, maybe longer. So being slow to adapt means that we've found ourselves reacting to private sector entities and these solutions that they're bringing to our communities. And so using that last mile example again, Uber, Lyft, bike share, and now these scooters that are showing up in communities across the country, it's really, they've jumped in and they've saw opportunities that we as government haven't been able to address fast enough for them and provided solutions seemingly overnight. But rather than reacting all the time, planners and government should be in the business of proactively shaping the kinds of places where we want to live. So put another way, our role is really vital because we uphold the values such as equity, livability, community pride of place, the things that might not top the minds of business leaders that are really investing in these multimodal strategies that we're seeing being implemented here. And their priority may be market share. Our priority as government is protecting the public interest and making sure that our communities are the places that people want to live, play, and exist in the future. So CAVs and CMAP, I really do see CMAP playing a role as a thought leader in this arena. My vision for CMAP is really to make it a leader in addressing disruptive technologies that impact local communities through effective public policy and actionable solutions. As a government agency, CMAP has a unique perspective, a regional perspective. Our purview allows us to take on some of the challenges that individual municipalities don't have the time or resources to think about on a daily basis. We don't have the day-to-day demands of providing services to local residents and businesses, and we can be more nimble and responding to changes like CAVs. Our regional scope also encourages us to provide guidance on issues that will affect all communities in the region, as well as overlapping governments such as road districts, counties, transportation agencies, and more. Because we're charged with regional comprehensive planning, when it comes to transportation, we aren't thinking about just getting from point A to point B. We plan for transportation that improves people's lives and helps people get from where they live to where they work and all of those other places in between that they need to be. We promote coordinated investments in transportation, housing, economic development to rebuild neighborhoods and bring new jobs to the region. And CMAP also has these numerous resources. We have a data analytics team. We have researchers. We have outreach and communications expertise. And we think that we're positioned uniquely to effectively take on some of these issues like no individual entity, no individual municipality or county is able to do on their own. So we see one of our key roles as providing an objective analysis and about these regional issues to help decision makers improve our region by targeting our limited resources. So when we were developing the On to 2050 regional plan, we considered the potential pitfalls of technology and not carefully planning for or putting the right policies in place as it relates to connected and automated vehicles. So our roads could potentially become incredibly congested if we implement CAVs tomorrow. If, one of the ways that could happen is if we decide that these CAVs are going to continue to roam the streets instead of park in our parking garages. CAVs may inadvertently create incentives for people to live far from where they work. And because it's really stressful to drive long distances to get to from your home to your job, and maybe even if you don't live a far distance from your home, like sometimes when I was driving out to DuPage County, right, it takes 2 hours sometimes. What if I didn't have to sit in traffic and do that? That would be a thing of the past with CAVs, we hope. But if multiple companies are managing our road, our transit, I think the panel earlier was talking about managing our data, right? There could be gaps and inefficiencies in terms of operations, in terms of how we're making sure that we're planning for our future transportation networks. And so that's another area where I think that we need to spend some time focusing. And if these technologies are unaffordable and unavailable to low-income people and communities across the region, widespread adoption may further limit people's access to employment, to education, to health care. So we can't, as a region, afford to let these things continue to happen. We can't afford to squander the potential of connected and automated vehicles, which is unquestionable. For example, we've been trending over 1,000 deaths, traffic-related fatalities on our expressways and on our local roads here in Illinois, and it's something that we were grappling with quite a bit when I was at IDOT. But new driverless features are already being put to use in our cars. They tout crash-preventing braking systems, safety-enhancing backup cameras, lane detection systems to keep you from merging into places where you shouldn't be. But if we combine these technologies with appropriate policy changes, we may see dramatic reductions in fatalities and serious crashes across our state and across the nation. There's also potential to improve people's experience on the roadways through technology. For example, related to technology, drones have been really used to do a lot of inspection work on bridges in other states and here as well. Using drones means that we don't have to shut down lanes for inspection during rush hour, and I know that we don't typically do that here in the Chicago region just because of congestion. But that's more convenient for everyone. It's better for our freight and our passenger systems as well. It's also safer for motorists and workers in work zones as well. And I'll just stop here and sort of say that one of the things that I learned when I was at IDOT was that when we have crashes in work zones, it's not always and often not the employees that are being injured. It's the people in the cars who aren't paying attention and their passengers who are more likely to be hurt or killed in an accident. So as we think about some of these conflicts, how can this technology really help us overcome these things that we know can be problems? CAVs also provide a great amount of data. So by harnessing that data, we can really learn more about where we are and how people get around. With better data and improved coordination between service providers, we can reduce travel times, we can clear incidents faster, and we can just make it all around safer for everyone to get around and more pleasant too. We also need to ensure that CAVs enhance and rather than devalue the public transportation infrastructure that we've invested in. One of government's roles must be to make sure that CAVs in transit and other transportation options complement each other and coexist. We shouldn't see different modes of transportation as separate systems for separate users. And we need to do some work to ensure that they aren't perceived that way either. For example, I lived in Cleveland for a while. When I got my master's in planning, I lived in downtown Cleveland, but I had a job in the suburbs. And I'd take the bus, because there was an express bus that would just take me right outside to my office building. But oftentimes, my coworkers would see me standing on the side of the street. There was no sidewalk. Sounds familiar. And they would offer me a ride home. And their perception of why I was waiting there was because perhaps maybe my car was in the shop. But honestly, it was a choice that I was making. And so the perception of only low-income people ride transit really is something that we need to pay special attention to as we think about these technologies coming online and how we think about them more equitably and fairly across our region. So it's not only integrating these various modes, but promoting them as viable options for people of all incomes. The key is planning now to avoid pitfalls and achieve the greatest benefits. So first and foremost, we must be diligent about equity when we implement land use and transportation policies that are necessary for full-scale implementation of CAVs. We need to consider how to make CAVs broadly more affordable and accessible to individuals with disabilities, including shared CAVs and not just the private ones. We also need to invest in supportive infrastructure that CAVs need in order to thrive in parts of our region, as well as investing in that infrastructure in places in our region that are struggling, and figure out how this new infrastructure can catalyze reinvestment. I think from the panel this morning, too, I think the interesting comments that the speakers were making were really about sort of having this predictability in investment strategies really helps the private sector understand what it is that we're trying to drive towards here. No pun intended. So, Government has to find a way to balance the modern mandate and adapt with our role as protecting the public interest. We can't be afraid to take calculated risks, and that's why On2 2050 calls for pilots for autonomous vehicles to work out the inevitable challenges that might come with that in controlled environments and realistic trials. We can also make incremental investments and policy changes starting today. As we modernize our existing infrastructure, build new infrastructure, we should incorporate improvements today that will enable us to fully take advantage of connected vehicles in the future. We can advance good policies that are already in place, such as congestion pricing to help manage congestion and demand for our limited roadways, and continue to invest in our major transit corridors across the region. And this really will lay the groundwork for the preferred outcomes on connected and automated vehicles. We should also continue to advocate for responsible and regionally consistent data collection, analysis, and sharing. And ultimately, this should include the private sector as a user of public infrastructure, even as we all remain committed to protecting riders' privacy. With a task force of transportation technology experts, CMAP is researching additional tools and policies that might be necessary to address these challenges across the region, and that will really set the region up to be successful in implementing CAVs, in forcing them to help us improve our quality of life. So we are committed to helping drive change that will improve the region rather than being driven by the forces that are changing around us. So as we look forward, to the future, we would hope to work with many of you to help shape the policies and plans that will ensure our region is successful and really achieves the promise of CAVs and avoids the pitfalls. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but thank you for the opportunity.
Hello. Yes, Ms. Ailman, I live right down the block here in Bridgeport, but you have 20 projects you've developed. There's a lot of concern that this 5G radiation is not safe. And we're concerned. I don't want to get cooked like a hot dog, is what I'm reading.
Yeah,
and there's an organization out there right now. Has their standards been developed for our communities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that we've seen from our experience with local governments that they're being approached by all sorts of technology companies wanting to put things up so that they can, have these connected infrastructure that's available. And I think that, again, it's thinking about, how that happens in an effective way and how it happens in a safe way. And that's why we think that, we need to start doing some of this testing and just figure out what those pros and cons are and the pitfalls and really protect, again, some of the things that you're talking about, it's the public interest.
Hello there. You mentioned congestion pricing. I'm just wondering if you have discussed a way to talk about the funding that comes from congestion pricing to fund pilots for automated vehicles.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. CMAP as a priority has talked about congestion pricing across the region. So even though we have recently increased the motor fuel tax and fees for motor vehicle registrations, that's not going to be enough for us to build our way out of congestion and adequately bring our transit infrastructure up to a state of good repair. But some of the principles that we've put forth is that if we are going to invest in congestion pricing is that it needs to help support parallel transit service. I think a good question that you bring up is how does it help support the testing of autonomous vehicles? There's been lots of discussion too. If you have these managed lanes, can they help transition as we have this mixed car situation where you've got some that are autonomous and some that are being driven by other people? So there are going to be some of these inherent conflicts, and I think you raise a really good point. I don't have the answer just yet.
Hi there. I was wondering if you've been involved or privy to any discussions regarding last mile solutions that are publicly owned and operated as opposed to privately. And I'm asking from the point of view of maximizing transit equity and the possibility of collaboration between large municipalities to share development costs?
So there are a number of interesting examples across the region that are helping solve those last mile solutions. There's a Transportation Management Association between the Lake Corridor where they're helping get people from those transit stations to their jobs. But some of the other interesting research that we've been working on too is we just did a sidewalk inventory. So now we have data on all the sidewalks for the 7-county region. And we're able to show people, municipal leaders and people who invest in infrastructure that, you have a person who lives here and they want to get here. But if they are only able to take the sidewalk, for instance, maybe the only way for them to get there is here. And so as we look at the data we have, it's really about sort of highlighting these gaps that we have in the data as you're speaking of here and figuring out ways to start discussing those potential solutions.
Hi, thank you for your speech. I actually have a question. I know you mentioned achieving equity and making CAVs accessible to everyone. How do you think that can be achieved here in Chicago?
That's a great question. And I think that is going to require a lot of forethought and just, commitment from folks who are working in this industry and really understanding that the role of government is about achieving equity or making sure that all of the residents across the region are taken care of. And so whether that's, from the initial discussions of these pilots, where the pilots are happening, looking at the data and realizing that maybe the pilot that you had didn't encapsulate sort of a number of user groups that you necessarily needed to get to. Oftentimes, as we're looking at the data that we have, we do a lot of, we just closed a travel survey. We had to look at specific groups to make sure that we were understanding the travel patterns of different people who live in different places, who come from different ethnic backgrounds. So, there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think that it all starts fundamentally with understanding the data and making sure that we've got the right information from which to make our decisions on.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on that because I expect that many of these pilot programs are going to begin with freight in the region, and they will generate quite a bit of data. Do you have anything in place for how you might receive data and sort of start putting up the structure for actually doing the analysis?
Yeah, great question. There is, the University of Maryland has a CAT lab, and I'm not sure exactly what the acronym stands for, but they've been really integral in sort of testing out and taking on some of these larger data sets that states are then working with to help them understand how to utilize this data. CMAP has a long history of modeling and data analysis as well, and so, I think it's that infrastructure that we have in terms of our staff understanding where this is, but at the end of the day, I think what the panel was talking about earlier is that we need to make sure that it's not sort of just 9 or 5 or whatever that number is that we're thinking about sort of the disbursement of this data, making sure it's secure, but also making sure that we aren't sort of building these monopolies where we're giving our data away and not understanding some of the repercussions as to how it's being used. So, it's still too early, I think, to get into the details, but on the freight side of things, there's a lot of good data being collected already, and it's just digging in and figuring out that, again, last mile really seems to be critical.
I guess part of my question is, are you in line to collect it and receive it already, or is that...
No. Yeah, no, not right now. I mean, I think right now a lot of the data collection is going on in some of these test beds and some of those national test pilots for automated and testing vehicles. There's a big one in California. There's a big one in Ann Arbor, Michigan. There's some talks about working with a coordinated series of universities across Illinois and developing a place where that could happen. But no, CMAP wouldn't probably. Yes, we'd be happy to be a part of those conversations.
So I think the creation of CMAP was a major step forward for the region. We had multiple agencies before that didn't coordinate. But the problem for CMAP is it doesn't have enough money and it doesn't have enough power. In the Twin Cities, they control part of the sales tax money and are able to redistribute it to the communities doing the best work for the region. You can put out a map for 2020 or 2050, but you can't compel any community, much less the private sector, to adhere to the map. Are there plans with some of and the only agency that really has any power in the region is the state legislature. Is there any plan with the state legislator or the new governor to give CMAP more authority so that it could be more forceful in both the transportation area and the other areas of planning?
Well, I would love to vote for you. I think that is a challenge that I knew that I was walking into, right? Making change through collaboration and consensus building is very challenging, especially when local land use authority is very local. We do a lot of work through our local technical assistance program to help communities sort of educate them on some of the benefits of these bigger, broader regional goals. But I would say some tangible stuff that we do have control over is the prioritization of the transportation funding that comes to our region. And we've recently realigned a number of those metrics to meet the goals of Onto 2050. And so we're asking local councils across the region of mayors and councils of governments to start thinking about how they can incorporate these regional priorities as they program their transportation funding efforts. And we have a shared regional pool of funds right now, too, that we have programmed and are in the process of being approved, where we have really transformed the way that we're measuring and evaluating the return on investment that those projects will bring, with an eye towards bringing across some of those regional things. So it's small steps, but I think in terms of how funding has been distributed across the region, it's a big change. So, well, one more question.
Hello, my name's Troy Hernandez. I graduated from here, I guess, 6 years ago, studying transportation and statistics and artificial intelligence. The head of Facebook AI is tied into all the deep learning that drives a lot of this, the computer vision that's required for self-driving cars. And I think it's their opinion, and the guy who runs Google's self-driving cars, that it's really difficult to do this, and we're not going to see the self-driving cars in the next 20 years. But perhaps traveling at a lower speed, that might be possible. Secondly, I volunteer in the community here in Pilsen doing environmental justice work and riding a bicycle and being an advocate for that. And it seems there's an opportunity to combine bicycle greenways and self-driving cars at 20 miles an hour. I don't know if that's a conversation that's going on anywhere that you've heard of, but it seems like a really good opportunity to advance this sort of vision.
Yeah, I think that's an idea and concept that's new to me, but as we think about automation, there is already some automated vehicles, I would say. Anybody flown anywhere this year? You were on an airplane, and probably for more than half of your trip, nobody was flying it. An automated system was flying it, right? So, but that was on a long-haul trip. So perhaps as we think about this, maybe it's not about the city center structure. It's about the long-haul sort of freight ideas and those paths that are relatively conflict-free. But excellent points, and I would be happy to talk to you more. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and look forward to working with UIC and the community in the future.